Hey, Chad, before we start the show, we have a new sponsor to the Bruce Collins Show.
Oh, really? Who is it?
It's a courier company. Listen, this is what I want you to say during the program. When you have a problem and you need to ship something fast, you can ship it with the best. Use Easy 80 Couriers. Okay, now you say it.
Okay. When you have a problem and you need to ship something fast, you can ship it with the best. Use Easy 80 Couriers.
That's perfect. That's great. Now, just say that right before we go to the guest tonight. I'll kind of give you a cue and then end with that statement.
Okay, will do.
Okay. I think we're ready to start the show.
The new theater of the mind. The Clown Prince of Doom. The Bruce Collins Show, daring to take radio past the point of no return.
Welcome back to the Bruce Collins Show. We're very glad to have you join us. The Bruce Collins Show airs every Friday night at midnight right here at WWPR 1490 AM. You can listen to past archives of the Bruce Collins Show at fringeradionetwork.com. That's fringeradionetwork.com. There's a tab just for the Bruce Collins Show on the Fringe Radio Network website. We would appreciate it if you're able to spread the word for our show by word of mouth, social media, or in whatever creative way you can. Also, we have a Facebook page for the Bruce Collins Show. Please like us there. And you can email the show at bruce_collins_show at AOL.com. Let us know how we're doing. We also have a brand new YouTube station. Go to youtube.com, put in the Bruce Collins Show, and you'll find a brand new Bruce Collins Show YouTube station. And now let me introduce my co-host. He is the founder and director of Sling and Stone Outfitters, a non-profit organization that is dedicated to helping disabled veterans experience the outdoors. You can find out more information on his website, chadmiles.com. He's radio's lethal weapon, Chad Miles. Chad, I understand we have a new sponsor for the Bruce Collins Show. Can you tell us about that?
When a problem comes along, you must ship it. Ship it good. That's so 80s.
What? Anyway, up next is our guest, Dr. Ardy Sixkiller Clarke. She's the author of Sky People, and she's taken a very fascinating 7 years in the jungles of Central America, researching stories about UFOs and other legends. This promises to be a grand adventure. I hope you have a nice hot cup of coffee waiting for you. Settle in. We hope you enjoy the ride. And joining me this week, it's my extreme pleasure to welcome Dr. Ardy Sixkiller Clarke. Dr. Clarke is a professor emeritus at Montana State University. She has dedicated her life and career to working with indigenous populations. She has been adopted by enrolled tribal members and given traditional names by 3 Northern Plains spiritual leaders, including the Blackfeet, the Northern Cheyenne, and the Lakota Sioux. She holds degrees in English, history, psychology, and educational leadership. She is also a licensed therapist and has been a high school English teacher, a counselor, a school administrator, a university professor, and administrator. Dr. Clarke is the author of several children's books and the best-selling Sisters in the Blood and also Encounters with Star People, Untold Stories of American Indians. That book was published in December 2012. She lives in Montana with her husband Kip, her beloved Lhasa Apso, Prairie Rose, and her Maine Coon cat, Rez Perez, and I have a Maine Coon cat named Eddie. Her second
Oh, do you?
Yes, I do. Her second book in the field of ufology is Sky People, Untold Stories of Alien Encounters in Mesoamerica. And this was just recently released in December 2014. We're going to be talking about this book, Sky People. While retired from academia, she continues to travel and interview individuals throughout the indigenous world about the encounters with UFOs and aliens. You can find out more information about Dr. Clarke at her website, Sixkiller.com. That's Sixkiller, Sixkiller.com. Dr. Clarke, welcome to the Bruce Collins Show.
Well, thank you, Bruce. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, it's great to have you on. Now, this is a great book.
Thank you.
What prompted you to spend over 7 years conducting UFO research in Mesoamerica?
Well, back when I was a teenager, I had a teacher who liked to challenge me, and she knew of my love for reading, and so one day she called me up to her desk and she said, "I have a book for you." And she handed me a book entitled Incidents of Travel in Central America, the Chiapas, and the Yucatan. And it was a story of two 19th century explorers who, on their first trip began in 1839, they had heard rumors of these magnificent cities in the jungles of Central America. They decided they were going to take this trip. Stevens was a adventurer and got himself appointed as a diplomat to that region. And Catherwood was an Englishman who had traveled throughout the Middle East and had drawn the ancient sites in that part of the world. So Stevens had invited him to go along with him, and he was delighted to do so. And so, in the book, Incidents of Travel in Central America, is actually filled with Catherwood's drawings. And when I read the book, I was so excited. I thought, this is, I just fell in love with these two explorers, and I vowed that one day I was going to follow in their footsteps. And so I go back excited and tell my teacher, one of these days I'm going to follow in their footsteps. And she said to me, well, they wrote another book called Incidents of Travel in the Yucatan, and she handed that book to me, and of course I was more determined than ever. The second book was strictly about Mexico. They had cut their first trip short because they had gotten into Mexico to Palenque and then traveled to Uxmal, where there was a great hacienda and a huge city there. Mm-hmm. But Catherwood was so ill with malaria that they cut that trip short. And after he recovered, they left again from New York. And this time they went strictly to Mexico. Well, the second book just convinced me more than ever that I had to make this trip. And when I made this promise to myself, but you know how it is when you're in high school and you are, you say, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. Well, college and life basically interfered with my dream of going there. And I knew it wouldn't be an easy journey, even though I knew that I would be able to drive to most of the places they had visited. There were some that I had to hack my way through, or my guides and drivers hacked their way through and let me walk behind them to get to some of the sites. But it was a journey of love, and once I started it, there was no way I could turn back. Mm-hmm. But, over the years, since they wrote those books and since I read them, there's been a lot written about that part of the world. And particularly theories that have come out, the ancient astronaut theory, for example, crediting aliens with building those cities and not the Maya people. And so I was very concerned about that. I felt that was rather ethnocentric, that somebody from the outside would look at ancient artifacts and say, well, this is what it means. And so I wanted to find out what the people themselves felt about it. I wanted to talk to them about their sky gods and their sky beings, because I had read stories that they believed in that. I also had read about the little people. And so I set out to look at that, and I thought, well, while I'm doing this, I'm going to see if I can collect contemporary stories, because I had been doing that for 25 years among Native Americans in the United States and Canada. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to my trip became multi-faceted by the time that I set out on this trip. And I couldn't have asked for a more wonderful experience. It did take me 7 years to go to all the sites that Stevens and Catherwood had visited, and they visited 44, and I found all of them except a couple that had seemingly just disappeared. I traveled to 89 sites, as opposed over twice as many as they visited, and collected stories, met people, immersed myself in villages, in village life. I attended funerals. I was present at babies being born, at birthday celebrations, at New Year's, Christmas, and celebrated that with traditional people. I participated in ceremonies. There was just a wide range of things that I did that I became very close to the Maya, and fell in love with them, actually. Mm-hmm. And I've often thought that had I made that trip after I graduated from high school, I probably would have followed a different path in life. Probably ended up being a archaeologist or something, because it's a place of many wonders, and there are literally hundreds of those cities that have never been excavated or restored that are in that part of the world.
What a fascinating adventure. Now, in collecting your stories, were there any barriers you encountered, and how were these resolved?
Well, obviously language. I'm not a fluent Spanish speaker, nor do I speak the Mayan language, and there are several dialects of the Mayan language. So when I decided to make this trip after I basically retired from Montana State University, one of the things that was critical is that I find a driver and or a guide. They had to be fluent in English and in Spanish, and also fluent in the dialect of the region, of the Mayan dialect. And it took almost a year to find the people that I felt comfortable with, that I knew would do everything to help me. One of the criteria that obviously I was looking for was someone who shared my interest in UFOs, or at least did not consider me somebody off her rocker in going there to do that, and I didn't want. I wanted people who could provide me with entryway into the villages. I didn't want to be looked upon as a rich American. Of course, I wasn't, but at the same time, that's how many Americans are regarded. And so I wanted to be a part of the community as much as possible. And so those were important aspects that I felt I had to overcome before I could, begin my journey. And fortunately, I found some of the best guides and drivers in the world who took care of me, who paved the way for me in the villages, who introduced me to key people, allowed me to stay in the villages and just become a part of the communities, and gain their confidence, gain their trust, and obtain their stories. Mm-hmm.
Now, did you encounter differences in the openness of the people to discuss their encounters with UFOs, and were there differences among the responses and maybe how they process what they've seen in the 4 different countries?
Well, the people of Belize speak English. It's an English-speaking country. Mm-hmm. So they were very forward in coming. I didn't need an interpreter or somebody who could translate if I didn't understand something. So it was an English-speaking country, and I found the people there to be outgoing and warm and wonderful. I mean, they were happy to share their stories with me, even though they hadn't really spoken openly about their stories, with the exception of one young woman who was very gregarious and willing to share her story, but because she had shared it with her cousins and aunties, and I was in the presence of that group, so she was very forthcoming. But the people of Belize were very open and welcoming, and now in Honduras, I was only in one city there. I went to Copan, which was, when Stevens and Catherwood went there, they landed in Belize City, which is still Belize City today. But they only stayed there a couple of days. They really didn't explore that area, because at the time they went there, it was called British Honduras. And at that time, the British and Spanish were at war over the country. When it finally settled, there was the English-speaking country of Belize and the Spanish-speaking country of Honduras, which we have today. But there was also a civil war going on there between different groups that were in the country. So, Stevens was even arrested and held captive, and finally, using his diplomatic papers, convinced some general to let him go. And I didn't have any adventures like that, although I did have some interesting adventures, with checkpoints and stops that from the federal police in Mexico. But for all intents and purposes, when I arrived in Copan, my guide or my driver from Belize took me to Honduras. It's a strange situation in that part of the world, because there's very defined laws as to what one person could do and what another person could do. Buddy could drive me to Copan, but he couldn't stay with me in Copan. He had to turn around and go back. I had to hire a local person if I wanted a guide in that part of the world. And I never really found someone that I felt like I wanted to hire. And so basically I just kind of hung around the village and went to the site. I could walk to the site and just kind of immerse myself in the little village there. There are about 10,000 people. And, of course, it was the kind of village that everybody knew who you were within a day. They knew why you were there, what you were doing. They knew your name. It was a very curious kind of thing, kind of like the community I grew up in. Mm-hmm. And no street names, no numbers on the houses. You just ask somebody something and they tell you how to get there. It's that kind of a place. Everybody knows everybody. And then when I went to Guatemala, there was a lot more reluctance on the people to talk. I think part of it has come from negative, things that go on in that country against the indigenous people. Part of it comes from the fact that not too many outsiders come to that part of the world, because it is dangerous. I mean, there's gangs and there's drug trafficking and there's, people trying to get to the United States. There are robberies and murders, a lot of them, all the time. It's a very unsafe place to be if you were alone. And then when I went into Mexico, Mexico is a very different country. I mean, you cross the border from Guatemala into Mexico, and it's like going into a different world, because the roads are well maintained. The cities are modern and quite beautiful, with the old and new architecture. And so many of the people I met in Mexico speak English, whether a lot of them had been illegal aliens in the United States, or illegal immigrants, maybe I should say, had come here and then returned to Mexico. Some stories were they made some money, they came home, built a house for their family, and stayed. And because they had developed a good speaking ability in English, then they were able to get decent jobs in the tourism industry. Mm-hmm. I had waiters who had been illegal in the United States. I had a driver, 2 or 3 drivers over the course of 7 years who had been in the United States. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't, the language wasn't nearly the barrier in Mexico as it was in other parts of Mesoamerica. The one thing is, most of the Maya elders did speak the Mayan language, and often told their stories in the Mayan language, and so they were translated to me. And I got to the point where I could understand a lot of what they were saying, too. So, it was just that was probably the biggest barrier. But I found, one of the things I found about indigenous people all over the world, once you're introduced, once you prove yourself to be trustworthy, or you behave like one of the people, you become one of the people. Mm-hmm. In Copan, I was told, you are Mayan. You are one of us. Because I wasn't afraid to wash dishes or help with the cooking. I wasn't afraid to go carry water. I wasn't afraid to live without running water, because I grew up that way. So it was easy for me to become a part of that lifestyle.
Yeah. Now, did you find any similarities and or differences between the encounters of indigenous people here in the United States and those of Mesoamerica?
One of the things I set out to do when I was selecting the stories that I was going to tell is I collected, now, today, I have over 100 stories. At that time, I had less than 190-some stories that I collected over the 7-year period. But one of the things I wanted to do is to demonstrate to my readers that what is happening in that part of the world is no different than what is happening in this part of the world. Mm-hmm. So what I chose to put into the book were stories that came from all the themes that we hear. Animal mutilation, abduction, interaction, sightings, all of the little people, the giants, even the hairy man, as the Guatemalans refer to a Bigfoot type character. So I tried to show that what is happening here in the United States and Canada and South America or wherever, Europe, that the same kinds of things are happening to people who don't have access to the media and the History Channel and all the channels that show ancient aliens and UFOs and Area 51. They don't have access to that kind of information. Many of them don't even have TV sets. Mm-hmm. And those who do only get a couple of channels. And those are, are channels that come out of Mexico City. So they aren't exposed to those kind of things, and yet they are reporting very similar kinds of activities as what is being reported by people outside of that region. And so I chose 46 stories that I felt represented that group, and my only confinement was publishers have page limits and word limits, and so I could only include 46 of the stories. But I think that I was able to give a good range and variety of stories, so the reader would be able to see that this phenomena is just not happening in the United States of America. It's happening all over the world.
You just made one of the greatest points I think I've ever heard anyone who's talked about UFOs on this program make about the validity of this experience, because many people can point to what could be arguably photoshopped pictures or things like that, but what you're saying is so compelling. That's so fascinating. Now, let me ask you this. Do you believe in the ancient astronaut theory?
I don't believe in the ancient astronaut theory as it is presented. I do believe that ancient aliens came to America, came to the Earth, planet Earth, not to America, but to planet Earth. And I do think that they interacted with various indigenous tribes, but I also think that some of them came and stayed and intermarried with, what I call the Sun People, because the Sun People, I refer to them as the people who lived on Earth, and the Star People as those who came from another world. And so I don't think that some super intelligent race came here and forced the Maya to build these cities, and then they flew away into space. I don't believe that at all. But what I do believe is that an ancient race came here, they stayed, and they built a civilization. And then a catastrophe happened in the case of the Maya, and they disappeared into the jungle. Not disappeared from the face of the earth, but that they went into the jungle simply for survival. And I had an elder talk to me at length about that. And he said, by the time Cortez came to this part of the world, there were only a couple of the Maya cities that were still inhabited. All the rest of them were abandoned. And people keep saying, well, where did they go? They must have gone back to the stars. And he said, that isn't true at all. And he said, I believe that a great catastrophe happened that forced the Maya to give up life in the cities and to go into the jungle to survive. And he said, just think of this, say a hurricane destroyed everything, was so fierce that it just leveled everything except those cities. And there was no food, there was nothing to eat. And what you're bound to do as a father, as a husband, as a son, is that you want to protect your family. And the safest way to do that is just to disappear into the jungle, take your family or your extended family or a small group of friends and go there, because we can survive in the jungle. There's all the things that we need there. And he said, that's what happened to the Maya. We didn't go anywhere. We didn't go back to the stars. This is our home. And he said, and he always, when I would ask them about the ancient astronauts, they'd say, well, we are the ancient astronauts. We are their descendants. And I would say a good half of the elders would tell me that. We came to this planet, we loved this planet, we stayed. We built these cities. Life became impossible in the cities, and we moved back into the jungle. And by that time, we knew how to survive off the land. And I think that's probably a more reasonable explanation of what happened in that part of the world than to think that ancient astronauts came and then they disappeared. There are a lot of stories out there of astronauts, ancient astronauts coming to visit tribes and literally staying with those tribes and marrying the women of those tribes. There are also cases that they came and they married and they had children, and at a point came where they had to go where they had to return to their planet. And so there's a lot of different stories that would validate that that's probably what happened, rather than some super race built all of these cities in Mesoamerica. I think it's rather ethnocentric to look at a sarcophagus and say, oh, well, that man looks like he's in a spaceship, when he's actually sitting in the tree of life, and he's making his passage through the underworld, which is what the Maya believed before you pass to Chibalba, which is heaven, basically, that you have to go through the underworld and fight off the demons that possessed you in your life, and then you go into, you travel the Milky Way to Chibalba. And that's one of the things that amused me about all this though were people. I was often stopped, like in Palenque, where King Pakal, who ruled Palenque for 58 years, he's been declared as an ancient astronaut, that he wasn't from Earth. And I would stop my vendors and say, you want to see our ancient astronaut? And so you have these entrepreneurs who are Maya, who are taking advantage of it because they know that there are a lot of people out there who are followers of that theory and who believe it. And so therefore they've used it. But at the same time, when they talk to me, they tell me a completely different story. In fact, I asked them about Eric von Däniken, and I said, what do you think of his theories? And those who are, scholars and people who knew of him, and they said, well, he didn't ask us. And I think that kind of sums it up, that there's two types of research that we talk about in the social sciences. We talk about two approaches that you can use. I am a social scientist. I'm not an orthodox or the kind that has to have proof, quantitative, the statistics and samples and all that kind of stuff. I'm the kind of scientist that goes out and listens to the people. There's two types of research within qualitative research or social science research, and that is the etic and the emic. And the etic perspective is an outsider's perspective. And what they do is they observe in a culture or the artifacts of a culture, and then they interpret it with their worldview. So that means they bring all their prejudices and all their preconceived ideas into interpreting what a culture means. I, on the other hand, try to use the emic perspective, which is referred to as the looking at the things you see and the way people behave as the members of that culture envision their world. In other words, an emic perspective would try to be an insider and would not make judgments about observations or interviews and allow for the acceptance of behavior and information just as it is given, without leading or suggesting or coming up with your own conclusions. You let the story be the stand alone,
right,
without any interpretation on your part. And that's what I chose to do. The only criticism my books basically have ever gotten is the fact that I don't put in my opinion, that I don't say what I think it means. Well, I don't think that's my role to do that. I think I organized the book so that each story would be its own. You could read a chapter, and that would be a story of an individual, and that I did that on purpose, because I think that when you're dealing with people who are telling you stories, I'm not going to demand that they show me proof of anything. I listen to their stories and record them, and I'm a pretty good judge of character as to whether people are telling me the truth or whether they're making up a whopper, just to... But the other thing, too, none of the individuals wanted fame or fortune. I mean, they weren't wanting to be the next Betty and Barney Hill. You know, they were just there telling me a story of what they had observed or what their encounter was like. And I find that one of the truest forms of UFO research, because you're not interpreting and you're not making judgments.
Yeah. One of my favorite writers in the field of ufology, and he writes about a lot of other things too, is Nick Redfern. And your style is right on the money as far as, and that's the thing that I like about his books, is he doesn't add a lot of commentary. He says, this is what I was told, this is what this person experienced, and that's pretty much, you know, what you get in the different chapters that Nick will write about. And this book is very much like that. And I remember as I looked through it, I realized that's why I liked it. So it's interesting that you jogged my memory on that. But you write in a very similar style. Now, I want to. There's one interesting thing that I saw in your book that I wanted to bring out right now, because you mentioned that the Mayan people said that these beings hid in the jungle, and there's also stories from Guatemala about starmen in the Guatemalan jungle, and they believe that there are giants today living in the jungles of Guatemala, correct?
Yeah. Well, my driver was one of the first to tell me about that. Shortly thereafter, he left me stranded up in the jungle, with a vehicle while he bounded down the canyon to his home to get his license, which was permission for him to drive me into Mexico. And he told me not only were there giants living there, but they had white jaguars for pets. And I encountered during that event an elder, a Mayan elder who told me about the giants that come from the stars, and who had been known to kidnap children and to kidnap women, and they never see them again. And so he said that the jungle is a very dangerous place to be at night, and he said no man in my village will even be here. So he told me, he said, I have to go hunting, but he says, when I come back, if you're still here, I'm taking you home to my wife, because you can't stay here. And of course my driver returned about 3 hours later, and we drove on into Palenque, across the border and into Palenque, but into Mexico. But yes, there are stories, and there was a story in my that I collected that is not in the book, but one person told me about the hairy ones, and he had been in the United States, so he had heard, and he had been in the Northwest where he had heard about the Bigfoot, and he said, now the hairy one it's similar to your Bigfoot, but it's not the same. He talked about the long hair on this creature. He stood about 8 feet tall. He was, and his hair would drag the ground. And he felt, and everybody in his village felt, that they often, the hairy ones stayed out of their village. It didn't come near their village, but when they would see the spacecraft come, and these giants would get out of the spacecraft, and he said, then the hairy ones cried. So he felt there was connection between the hairy ones and the UFOs, that either they had been put on this planet by these other aliens, or that somehow they were being hunted in some way, and that the hairy ones feared them returning, because he would hear them crying. He felt it was a that they were trying to escape them. So I thought that was an interesting story as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I want to remind the listeners tonight that we're talking about the book Sky People, Untold Stories of Alien Encounters in Mesoamerica. And our guest tonight is Dr. Ardy Sixkiller Clarke. She's also the author of Encounters with Star People, Untold Stories of American Indians. But her new book is Sky People. Now, Dr. Clarke, what is your favorite encounter in the book?
You know, there's so many. It's really hard for me to choose one, but I suppose if I had to choose one, I would say that it was a story that was told to me in Honduras by an elder. At the time I spoke with him, he was 99 years old. And in 2 days, he was supposed to be 100. He would be celebrating his 100th birthday. But he told me that when I first met him, he said that he had worked at the site of Copan for 75 years. He said when he was 5 years old, a man by the name of Herbert Spenden came to Copan. And he was from the American Museum of Natural History in New York City. And he said that Spenden hired him for 10 cents. Mm-hmm. And what he did when he was 5 years old is he would carry water to the anthropologist or archaeologist. He would take them lunches. He would run all over the place and do things. And Spenden told him, he said, you know, if you'd learn English, I'd give you a raise. And so he said by the time he was 8, he was speaking pretty good English. And he said that he got a raise to 25 cents, and he thought he was a rich man. And he said that when Spenden left, these Carnegie scientists came in, and they came in to excavate the site and to restore the city. And he said that when they, you know, he went out to meet them, and they were so shocked that he could speak English. And they paid him 50 cents a day, he said. And he said they told him that, you know, if you come across artifacts or anything, we'll buy them from you if we like them. So on the weekends, he and his cousins would go up into the mountains in search of artifacts. And they liked to search in the caves up there because it was a place where Mayans would often retreat and go into the caves and live in the caves, actually. Mm-hmm. And on this one trip he told me about, they came across this silver suit with a skeleton inside, and he said it was about 1 meter long, which would make it about 3 feet tall. And he said that the skeleton was dressed from the top of his head to the tips of his feet in silver. He said he had this can over his head. And when I asked him what he meant by that, he said, well, can you imagine a coffee can, a metal coffee can, which is still common in that part of the world. We don't see them too much here, but a metal coffee can, he said, painted silver over his head. And there was a tube that came out of it, he said, and it attached to the breast of his suit. And he said the front of his suit had colored lights on it. And he said beside him was this tablet, and the tablet had writing on it, but he said it wasn't Mayan because we knew the Mayan, letters and or characters. It wasn't Mayan. So he said that he and his cousin carried this find back to the archaeologist. Once they saw it, they became very excited. He said they took it into a tent, and he said, I heard one of them say, we have to send this back to the university immediately. And he said, I said, well, did you see it again? And he said, no. He said, I saw a box. And I think they put him in this wooden box and shipped him back. And he said, you know, those scientists up there, they know the truth. They know about this little man from the sky. And then he went on to tell me that there was they all knew that these little men came from the sky, that the elders would tell stories about the little men from the sky that dressed in silver suits and came to the mountains on a disc that spit fire. And he said they lived in the mountains. Sometimes they would stay only a few days. Sometimes they would stay for months. And he said we would see them and they would see us, but we never had any interaction. But we lived peacefully together. But he said the thing that bothers me about this whole thing is, he said, I never realized when I was 10 years old what I did. But he said, I gave away not only a part of our history that proves our connection with the cosmos, but I gave away something much more important, and that was the proof that life on other planets exists. He said, I've never forgiven myself for that. And I'll go to my grave feeling bad about what I did. He said, it has haunted me every day of my life. And he said, I never went back into those caves again and brought things out for the scientist. And I could see the pain and the remorse on his face and hear it in his voice as he told me this story. And I felt so sorry for him because there was nothing I could do to console him. I reminded him that he was only 10 years old, but that was little comfort. He felt that he held such great knowledge in his hands and that he gave it away. He believed that they had found the burial site, or at least where this person had died, and they disturbed it, and then they gave it away, and they gave away so much knowledge that could have been gained from it by scientists that would have been open to the world. And it was proof that alien life did exist, and that it was far advanced and technologically than our world was.
Fascinating. And again, the book is Sky People, Untold Stories of Alien Encounters in Mesoamerica by Ardy Sixkiller Clarke. Unfortunately, in the time span of a 1-hour program, we can only touch the surface. But I can recommend this book. I know that if you purchase a copy of this book, there is so many magnificent stories in this book about Dr. Clarke's adventures in Belize, Honduras, Guatemala, and Mexico. So, again, the book is Sky People. In closing, Dr. Clarke, what can people find at your website, sixkiller.com?
Well, just a brief biography of me, and then, my books are listed there. I don't sell my own books. You can get them at Amazon and Barnes & Noble. In fact, I think Barnes & Noble carries them in their bookstore, too. And then you can request your local bookstore to order it. I know that many libraries are carrying it as well. Where I'm going to be appearing at conferences and also my interviews, you can go through them. I've got the dates scheduled of my interviews and who I'm interviewing with, so I try to keep that up to date at least once a week because I do get a number of requests, seem sometimes almost daily. And one of the things I'm going to be doing, I do have a couple of stories on there that have been published. That are one is extraterrestrial. The other one is a story I wrote and was published in a literary magazine. It's just a short story. And then what I'm doing right now is I am going back and writing up the ancient stories of the people that have been relegated to legends and fantasy and myths. And I'm writing up those stories that have been told to me since I was a child. And I'm going to put a section on the webpage where people can actually go and read the original stories of the people that told that connect them with the star people. And I thought that might be of interest because it doesn't seem that publishers are too interested in those stories, but at least I think a lot of my readers are interested in them.
Yeah.
And so that's going to be made available in the very near future.
Excellent. And the website again is sixkiller.com. That's sixandkiller.com. And we've been speaking
and
with
people can also, listeners out there, people who are reading my book or are going to buy my book, please feel free and welcome to write me at Ardy, A-R-D-Y, at sixkiller.com. I don't have a staff, but I sure do read every single email, and I respond to them unless it's so far out in the left field that nobody would answer. I do get a few of those once in a while, but not very often.
Sure.
I recently got a request from a 17-year-old Russian asking me to send him souvenirs from UFOs. Now, and he also said I could throw in a T-shirt and a few things like that. So, and he sent me his address, and so obviously those are ones that I kind of don't respond to. But
I've gotten a few emails from people saying that they have $1 million for me, but
oh yes, I've gotten some of those.
and again, we've been.
But in order to get it, I have to give them $20,000. I mean,
that's right. Yeah. And again, we've been speaking with Dr. Ardy Sixkiller Clarke. She's the author of Sky People. Fascinating book. I know you won't be disappointed in this book. Dr. Clarke, thank you so much for joining us this week.
Well,
I hope I can have you back
this
someday.
has been a pleasure, and I just, I want to thank you for the opportunity to talk with you and to share my life and my stories with the readers and your listeners, and I couldn't thank you enough.
The new theater of the mind. The Bruce Collins Show.
A program like this with Dr. Clarke makes for a pretty exciting hour. Very interesting information. But in the end, they're just stories. No tangible proof. And for me, I just have to have proof to say that these stories are really evidence of proof. However, having said that, I believe in the supernatural world where deception sometimes abounds. Thank you so much for joining us here at the Bruce Collins Show, where you can find us every Friday night at midnight here at WWPR 1490 AM. Remember, God loves you. We do too. Don't give up.